Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video. You can ask gardening questions down in the comments below, and I pick from those each week. You guys always continue to amaze me at the questions that come out every week, and without you there is no video, so feel free to ask questions. I have done a couple of extra Q&As along the road here, so I have lots of questions to go back to as well. So if you haven't heard me answer your question, number one, there's way more questions than I could possibly answer, and also I'm catching up as well on some of the from some of the other videos. The Learn to Garden video series is over on my website, and I should be putting up some additional content. December, I have 10 videos planned for December to go on there, and I'll talk more about that as it gets a little bit closer to that time. But you can go over to my website. There's a discount code below this video for the Learn to Garden video series. One thing that keeps coming up as I've been traveling across the country, and I am currently in Dig Plant Water Repeats YouTube channel's back garden space here. You can see this beautiful barn behind their property, maybe behind me, olives in the background, in Zone 9B here in Central California, or North Central California. One thing that keeps coming up in the comments and over on Instagram and everywhere is I traveled across the country and I went to Creekside and visited with Jenny and Jerry, and then I went over and visited with Linda Vodder in Oklahoma City, and now here I am in California visiting with Janie, and I skipped an obvious one at Garden Answer. It just didn't work out on the timing as I was going across there, so don't think that there's any, there's some strange comments going on about why I wouldn't have, or some sort of conspiracy or whatever. I've actually talked to Aaron for the last 6 years or more that I've had my YouTube channel. He's been very helpful to me in the past. When my channel first started to gain traction, I reached out to Garden Answer, and Aaron responded kindly and answered a few questions for me. And about once every 6 months or so, him and I will text a bit and catch up a little bit. But everything is great, and it just literally, I had to be somewhere on a certain day, and so those day and a half or whatever that I had around that Boise area didn't work out. And that's life. One day, we'll get together and do something, but that's all there is. A couple of videos this week from Isley Nursery up in Portland, and there'll be a video this upcoming week from here with Janie in their garden, their new garden that they've moved to. It's about an acre here that they're just starting to work on. You can see some raised beds have gone in the back and some wood chips down. A few things happening in the front garden, but this will be a several year project that you guys can follow along with over on her channel, and I'll link that down below this video. Okay, so let's jump into some questions from last week. Just overall, I talked about native plants in last week's Q&A, and then I get a lot of comments about a lot of the native plants being kind of weedy, and that's why we have nativars, where we have improved varieties that are more that have been selected for our ornamental gardens a little more. It's kind of funny because I did a series of videos a few years ago on invasive plants, and they were truly invasive plants, like Asian plants or European plants that had been brought here and were actually invasive. And then at the end of each of those videos, I said, what plants are invasive or out of control in your garden? And almost across the board, it was native plants. Native plants are good at taking space. I mean, they're native, and plus now we're improving the soil. We're making it even better for them. So yes, some of them can be a little out of control in the garden, and that's just kind of life with them. I have clethra and several other plants that I know that will sucker at some point in the garden beds, and I'll have to clean them up and get in there and cut them out, but they are worth having for sure. So this is not a knock on them. It's just, that's what you're going to expect from having lots of native plants in your garden, is the native plants are going to like your native area and the improvements that you've made for them. So anyway, just lots of comments on them being weedy, and some of them can be for sure, can get out of control. Somebody has a rose mallow or a hibiscus, native hibiscus, that's gone dormant earlier, but they have it in a terracotta container. And it went dormant earlier than it normally would. You'll see lots of things, and I think there's going to be another question. Things go dormant earlier in containers, and this can happen for several reasons. Number one, it can be really root bound, and I can tell you that those hibiscus root like crazy in containers, and so that's probably what it was. It was so root bound that it didn't have it just was under a little more stress than it would have been in the ground. And then number two, your roots are above the ground, right? So things go to sleep a little quicker. I just had a hummingbird fly over my head. My hummingbirds will be long gone back in Raleigh, but they're still here. And I found where they come, one of the places they come to apparently. But when you have something in a container above the ground, those roots are going to be more cooler, right, than they would be in the ground. And so that's another reason things can go to sleep earlier. It's in a terracotta container. They wanted to know if they should go ahead and plant it. Yes, go ahead and put it in the ground now while it's dormant. It's an easy plant to. They're so cold tolerant that you can definitely transplant them, and it'll probably save your terracotta container through the winter from freezing and cracking as well, not having a plant in it. So somebody has a Chinese fringe tree with a dead top. It has suckered like crazy down at the bottom. They wanted to know if they should cut the thing down and then grow it as a shrub with all of those suckers. I probably wouldn't do that. Your choice is probably to cut it down and then select one of the suckers to become the new tree. If you wanted to do that, you can take the rest of the suckers out. That sucker will probably grow pretty quickly because it's on a root system of a mature tree. For me, I'm probably not going to do any of that. I don't want to be 4 years trying to rebuild a tree from a root sucker. I'm probably taking it out if it was mine. Somebody has a rhododendron in zone 7B in North Carolina and it's losing leaves in the fall. Is that normal? You will get some interior thinning on plants this time of year for several reasons. Number one, it can be a little dry in the fall, so that the plants will lose interior foliage to to balance themselves back out. They don't want to lose new foliage. They don't want to lose the flower buds for next year. So it's basically choosing. You'll see this on conifers especially this time of year. You'll see that interior thinning happening on them. If it's happening excessively, typically that means the plant was dry at some point in the past. And so that, but doesn't mean it's dry today. So I'm always cautious when I say this. Make sure you actually go out and check it before you're watering it. But that interior thinning is normal. To lose some leaves. If it seems to be out of control, it was likely dry at some point or is currently dry. Somebody asked about oak acorn production being super, super heavy in their area this year. I think this was in Virginia or something like that. They wanted to know if it was because of the freeze last year. So we had this big, massive freeze sweep across the country December 23rd last year. And they wanted to know if the stress on the trees from that period of time could increase the amount of acorns. Yes, stressed plants will try to produce more fruit or nuts or berries or whatever it is, however they produce seed. But more than likely what this is a mast year. Oaks have evolved this ability to occasionally produce massive amounts of acorns every few years. And this is called a mast year. And it's basically to overwhelm the squirrels and other things that would eat the acorns. Imagine if you dropped the same amount of acorns every year, then the squirrels would probably get the vast majority of them. But by dropping just a few, feeding the squirrels, and then all of a sudden overwhelming them, you're definitely going to produce seed that's going to be viable. So that's called a mast year, and that's likely what you're experiencing in a heavier acorn year. Somebody's got American Pillar Arborvitae. They wanted to know if they should underplant them because they have shallow roots. They didn't want to dig around them. So I don't know how old they are. I don't think you're going to damage most plants by planting around them. If you're concerned that you're going to damage roots on plants that you're planting around, buy smaller containers. So dig 1 gallon containers or quart containers in the ground if you can, rather than digging in 3 gallon containers. I'm going to move. My son's going to be in my face in just a second. Somebody's in zone 7B in Tennessee and they have daylilies. What can they plant in front of them to hide the dying foliage? So for me, if I would encourage you to rearrange your perennial border to not have like a row of something going across where then you have to have another row of something that goes along with it. I'd probably reorganize my daylilies into groupings rather than in a line, and then plant other things within or around them in order to have that foliage be able to die back into other perennials, if that makes any sense. So rather than think about something going in front of them, let's interplant these things together And that way, when one thing is coming up and looking great, it's the standout. And then as it fades away, something else can kind of take its place. We'll do that with several things in the garden. We have our zinnias underplanted with lantana because the lantana is a little slower to wake up, and the zinnias tend to burn out on us by midsummer because of the heat and humidity. So there's interplantings that you can do like that, and think through it that way, maybe. Because I don't think you're going to hide the dying foliage on your daylilies without just completely covering them up other times of the year when you'd want to see them. Okay. So somebody asked the latest time to plant perennials to survive winter in zone 5B. So anytime the ground is workable, you could put in perennials that are more, as cold hardy as your area. So if you're in zone 5, you could certainly be planting hosta as long as the soil is workable that time of year. The only concerning part is if you're in an area in zone 5B where it's really wet in the wintertime, when you dig late in November or December, you're inviting a place for water to, fill a loose. Water's going to find the easiest way into the ground, and your newly dug hole is the easiest way into the ground. And so if you're planting perennial grasses or you're planting anything that has the ability to, that might rot during the winter time, you're probably better off planting them on the other side of winter. I know there's a lot of good deals out there right now, but it might be that you collect those containers and overwinter them somehow and then plant them in the spring may be the best idea. But really tough perennials that are hardy in zone 5, you could plant them anytime the ground is workable and probably get away with it. Do mound things up a bit. It's probably more important than any other time of the year, is that wet time of the year, to be keeping them raised above the soil just a bit. Somebody has a Yoshino cherry, and it's got gummosis, which is just where you'll see the sticky sap on the outside of the plant. And gummosis could be from insect damage, where some insect has bored into the tree and then you have that sticky substance leaking out. It could be from winter cracking, where it got cold and hot during the winter time really quickly and you had some cracking in the stem. Anything that would have caused it to leak, some sort of damage to the plant, even pruning can cause it. This thing had roots wrapping around, girdling the bottom of it. So it got planted and the roots weren't broken up properly. This is super important on trees. I see people, planting shrubs in the ground without breaking the roots up, and you can probably get away with it more. You can get away with it more on perennials for sure, herbaceous perennials. But on trees, if it's a long-term investment, make sure you're getting in there and breaking those roots up a bit before you're putting them in the ground, because over time, those roots will start to wrap around and girdle themselves. And so that's what's happened with this tree. And so there's lots of unhappy things going on with this tree, but they cut away those roots, wanted to know if that was the cause of the cracking and the leaking up in the, I don't have any idea if they're related, but obviously you have a lot of negative things going on with this tree. They wanted to know if you should keep it or get rid of it. To me, a tree like that that's having several different problems, I'm the person that's going to get rid of that thing and not want to nurse it. It just takes too long on some things for them to recover. So if it's not making you happy, you don't think it's going to make you happy in the next 3, 4, 5 years, I'm probably replacing that. Okay, somebody got a soil test done in their clay-based soil, and they had really, really low phosphate. And they were told to apply 0,46,0. The middle number in fertilizer is phosphorus. So basically, that first number is nitrogen, so that was 0 nitrogen, 46 phosphorus, and then potassium is the last number, 0. So 0,46,0. It's just adding a lot of phosphorus. Should they pay attention to the soil test? Well, it depends on if you're having negative things going on in your garden. I mean, at the end of the day, we're not growing row crops. We're not growing corn. We're not growing almonds like they are in the fields over here next to me. I don't need 200 bushels of corn per acre. I'm just trying to grow some flowers, right? And some tomatoes and, the raised beds back here behind me or whatever. I think that unless you're seeing negative issues, you don't necessarily have to do, your soil doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. You don't need to shoot for perfection. Now, the phosphorus being so low, maybe I would. And the nice thing about phosphorus is stable in the soil. So once you did this application of superphosphate or triple superphosphate or whatever this would be called, it is pretty stable in the soil, so you'd only have to do it once. So maybe on this particular case, I would apply it. But I'm also asking myself the question, you know, am I overthinking this? You can't take things out, okay? I can add things to improve my soil, but I can't remove them later. So if I make a mistake here and I over-apply this phosphorus, I can't go back. So, you know, be careful with it. Maybe use half the rate that they're saying and then get a soil test done in a couple years. And if you're not seeing any negative things in the garden, then don't worry about it. Next up, we have somebody with a blood good Japanese maple, and the foliage has powdery mildew on it. You'll see on a lot of plants, you'll get mildew on the leaves as they're going to sleep. And I just don't worry about it. If you didn't see it during the growing season, then it's probably fine. But as the plants are going to sleep, you'll see hydrangeas and lots of plants get powdery mildew on the leaves. You'll get a little more dew in the morning. The days are shorter. You know, you're just more likely to have those leaves stay wet for longer periods of time in the early morning periods in the fall. So I'm not going to treat it, but if you do have things with powdery mildew, leaf spot issues, I always talk about reusing the leaves in my garden, not letting anything leave the property. But things with issues, I might rake those up and run them through the compost those leaves rather than keeping those at the base of that plant. So somebody has a butterfly magnolia. It's a deciduous magnolia with yellow flowers, really beautiful deciduous magnolia. It dropped all its leaves a week after planting. What should they do? I'm guessing that since this question is recent, it just dropped all its leaves and they planted it in the fall. There's nothing you can do. Things will go dormant early when they're under stress. And so again, back to that question about the native hibiscus in the container, you know, if it's stress related, it'll lose its leaves. As long as the limbs are pliable and you can scratch a limb and it's green underneath, it's alive and it's dormant and asleep and it'll wake up just fine next spring. Somebody has oleander. This is a question from France. There's oleander everywhere where I'm at right now in this part of California. They're in the south of France in 8B and they want to prune their oleander and wondered if it's toxic as mulch. So all parts of oleander are toxic, are poisonous, and really poisonous, not like, you know, some people, you know, so a lot of these things that people say are mildly toxic or whatever, you'd have to eat the whole plant. Oleander is truly a poisonous plant. Is it toxic as mulch? No. I think it's totally fine as mulch, and, you know, as long as you're, I wouldn't worry about it at all. I mean, oleander is constantly dropping leaves on its own roots and, you know, and mulching itself. So I don't think that's an issue at all. Just be careful, again, you know, handling it. And it's one of the plants out there that's actually poisonous, and you know, can cause you significant problems. So just be careful handling it. So somebody's in zone 6A and they want a variegated or yellow shrub on their foundation between two inkberry hollies that they have. And they wanted to know if any of the variegated hollies are hardy. I think that probably not, but you could definitely use a variegated boxwood. So boxwood, Buxus sempervirens, the variegated version of that, is going to be your friend up in zone 6A. And again, it's a boxwood. It looks like a variegated holly, right? So they got their pansies, snapdragons, their cool season annuals, and they wanted to know if they should pinch them, just pinch them back to make them fuller in the future. I never pinch my pansies back. You could for sure, definitely could, but I've never felt the need to. They do a pretty good job of staying full. Your snapdragons, yes, I would definitely pinch them back, because typically when you buy your snapdragons, it's just going to be a single little stalk, maybe with a couple flowers on top to impress you to buy it. But yeah, I would take those flowers off of them when you put them in the ground on the snapdragons. So somebody asked, why do the soil test labs not tell you how much nitrogen is in your soil? Some do and some don't, but nitrogen can change just based on when you take the soil test. So I can take it in the morning or in the evening or at a different time of year. You'll get it'll be variable all over the place, and that's kind of why, where that phosphorus I told you is very stable in the soil, nitrogen is kind of wavers about. And I rarely ever add very much nitrogen into my planting areas. I just, I think that's one of those things that's just kind of oversold and overpushed is, nitrogen creates rapid growth, and a lot of that, green growth, rich green growth that we see in our plants, but it can also make plants more vulnerable to insect and disease problems by pushing them too hard. Nurseries push plants about as hard as you can push them, and I grew plants in a nursery for 20 years, and if you're pushing plants hard, chemicals come with that. Those two things just kind of go together. If you're pushing corn hard, if you're pushing soybeans, whatever it is you're growing, if you're pushing it hard, almost certainly all that new, tender, rapid growth is going to bring in insect problems, disease problems, and those kinds of things that we also have to deal with. So I'm very careful and cautious. I think slow and steady is the best way to garden overall. Somebody has a white wedding hydrangea that they just planted. They want to know if they should deadhead it. So the old papery looking flowers that were on it from this year, you can cut them off below those flowers if you want to. If they look unsightly, you're not going to hurt the plant at all. You can do it or not do it. It won't matter at all. I wouldn't go in there and hard prune it probably until late winter. But if you want to cut those flowers off, if they look unsightly in some way, do it. Somebody has a camellia behind an azalea, and they want to transplant the camellia because the azalea is tall enough that it's blocking it. When and how should they do that? I actually have 2 videos on the channel, one preparing a large plant to move, and that happened to be a camellia, and I just root pruned it. And then a few months later, I moved it, and that video is on the channel as well. So if you want to know how to move a camellia, camellias are, people say, difficult to transplant, but I don't really find. Most things are transplantable if you take your time and think it through. I like to root prune things that have been in the ground for a while and then let them sit there for a little while and try to put on some new roots in the middle of that root pruning, and then I'll transplant them. And that's a pretty good technique for larger plants. If you can reset that azalea. The azalea that's blocking your camellia, another option would be after it blooms in the spring, you can cut that thing down to 1/3 the height it currently is. And that might buy you a few years with them making more sense. There's a plane taking off right next to me. There's an airport across the street. So that's an option too, is to not move the camellia and just reset the azalea. Just throwing that out there. Somebody has 3 sunshine ligustrum outside their window, and they want them to get about 5 feet tall, which is mine. I think mine is about 6 feet tall right now at the house, and it could be, I may reset it some this winter. And they wanted to do, should they do 5-foot spacing on them? 5-foot spacing would be probably too wide if you wanted them touching, but appropriate if you wanted them to be just 3 little Christmas tree soldiers. So that's up to you. But if you're trying to have them touch, 5 feet's probably a little too far. Have them spaced apart. Somebody's got a Kramer Supreme camellia. Lots of camellia questions this time of year because the fall blooming camellias are blooming now. Kramer Supreme is a japonica. It won't bloom until the late winter, early spring. Another plane. Okay, let's see. It gets 2 hours of evening sun and it doesn't bloom. Should they move it and when? You should definitely move it. That's obviously not enough sun for it to have any flower buds on it. And you would see the buds on your Camellia japonicas right now. If it's going to bloom, the buds would be on it. So if you're not seeing any buds, you definitely need to move it. And it's another one I would move in the late winter. I don't know what zone they were in. And camellias are hardy in zone 7 to 9. In zone 7, I definitely don't want to be moving that thing this time of year. I would want to move it after the worst of the winter is over with. Let's see. I have just a few more here. Somebody has a red twig dogwood, and they're in California, coastal zone 9B. I'm in California, zone 9B right now. On the tag, it says it would prefer zone 3 to 8, and then they said, what will happen? Likely what will happen is it just won't have any, that red in the stem. And even my area in zone 7B in Raleigh, the red twig dogwoods, the yellow twig dogwoods don't show as much stem color. So I always like coming up, into the northern areas, this time of year and seeing how brightly colored those red twig and yellow twig dogwoods actually are. Because in our area, they just don't develop as much of that color. It may totally be fine in coastal area 9B. It's not going to get too hot probably in that area, that part of California. But I think you'll see the lack of color in the stems overall, will likely. Somebody's in Greensboro, North Carolina, and wants to know if they should plant loropetalum in the fall. Greensboro is west of me, about an hour drive, and it's probably zone 7A, where I'm 7B. This is another plant that's hardy in zone 7 to 9 or 7 to 10. So in 7A, I probably don't want to be fall planting loropetalum. I'd rather spring plant it. They're totally fine in Greensboro, but that's a plant that I want to spring plant. A couple more left for this week, and again, you guys can ask gardening questions down in the comments below, and that is that's where you ask them. So somebody asked about nurseries taking back the black plastic pots and the all of the branded containers. There's definitely less taking back of the pots than there used to be. At the garden center I worked at as a kid, we actually gave store credit to people to bring the pots back, and then we sold the pots on to the nurseries that sold us the plants. It was the perfect relationship. We give like 5-cent credit on a gallon container. 5 cent mattered in 1980 something. it would not be worth anybody's time now. But you know, if there's somebody came in with a trunk load of pots, they could get a few dollars credit toward buying some plants, and then again, the nurseryman that had sold us those plants originally would come in and give us about double that just to cover our time handling them, and it saved the nursery money. The branded pots have definitely changed the world of recycling pots. There's no question about that. It's much more difficult to separate a pile of this color container from that color container, and when it was all black pots, this was much easier. So there's less of that, but there are some places still taking them, and I know even Lowe's has a program, I think, where they'll take some of them as well, and at least they end up being recycled in some way, and not not just in the dump. Let's see, last question for this week. Somebody has a Camellia sasanqua. They want to know how to keep the buds from falling off in a freeze. So their Camellia sasanquas are just starting to bloom now. I expect mine at the house right now, although I haven't seen them in a few weeks. They're probably putting on a pretty good show, or starting to think about putting on a pretty good show. So what will happen with your freezes and on your Camellia sasanquas isn't that big of a deal. What you'll get is you'll get some open flowers, and then we'll get a freeze, and it'll knock those back, but it won't hurt the closed buds, the buds that are still tight. So it'll just wait for it to warm up again, and it'll open a few more. And then you may get a freeze on a few of those, and that's just how it just ebbs and flows. But those tight buds on the plant should be fine through any freezes, unless it's a ridiculous freeze like we had last year, where it went from 60 to 13 in an afternoon. That's something I would probably cover my Camellia sasanqua for, because I don't think those buds would be cold tolerant down to that cold. So that's the way I think about it. But if it's normal freezes, 29, 28, 27, that's normal stuff for Camellia sasanqua. It'll just ebb and flow. It'll open flowers on warm days, and it won't on the cold days. So there you go. Thank you guys very much for participating in these question and answer videos. I have another plane flying by. It's actually kind of fun because you get to watch people jump out of airplanes across the street here, which we did last evening. It's really kind of entertaining. Thank you guys so much for following along with the channel, and again, I'll link Janie's channel down below this if you want to go over and follow her new project here in California. Thanks for watching.